This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Cybersecurity Awareness Month is still going strong, and LifeLock is here with a message about phishing, the scam cybercriminals use to trick victims into allowing access to their devices so they can steal their personal info. Being aware of phishing scams is one way to help protect yourself. For comprehensive identity theft protection, there's LifeLock. Start protecting your identity today with a 30-day free trial at LifeLock.com/podcast.
Today on CityCast Boise, Proposition 1 has become one of the most hotly contested issues leading into the November election. We're exploring how it could change voting in Idaho and what supporters and groups fighting against this ballot initiative say that it could mean for the state. It's Wednesday, October 16th. I'm Lindsay Van Allen, and this is what Boise's talking about. Today, I'm speaking with Scott McIntosh, opinion editor at the Idaho Statesman. Thanks so much for joining me, Scott.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Prop 1 has become one of the biggest and maybe most widely discussed issues on the Idaho ballot that will be out in November. And it's led to some really heated discussion and debate throughout the state. Before we get into all of the nuance, pro, cons, misinformation surrounding the ballot measure, what is Prop 1?
Okay, so Proposition 1 is a citizens' initiative that folks will be voting on November 5th. And it does two things. The first thing it does is it abolishes our closed primary system in Idaho. And it sets up a new primary system. And the primary under this new system would be a multi-party, really all-party, top four primary in which voters can vote in the different races. They can vote for any candidate of any party. So right now, Idaho has a closed Republican primary where in order to vote in the Republican primary, you have to be a registered Republican. And so that disenfranchises about 270,000 unaffiliated voters. And so then the second thing that Prop 1 does, it establishes a ranked choice voting general election. So those top four candidates who move on from the primary, and again, the four candidates who move on from the primary could be from any party, move on to the general election. And then in the general election, voters will choose their favorite candidate. They'll vote for their top candidate, but then they can rank their other candidates in order of preference. So they'll say, well, if my candidate doesn't win, my second choice would be this person. And then if those two people don't win, well, my third choice would be this person. And then this person would be my absolute least favorite last choice to take this position. And then the candidate with the fewest votes is eliminated, and their votes are redistributed to the other candidates based on the voters' next highest ranked candidate. So if you had somebody else ranked number 2, your votes would go to that second choice candidate. And then they keep on doing those rounds of voting until you have 2 candidates left. And then the candidate with the more votes is declared the winner after those successive rounds of voting.
And especially at least with the first part of Prop 1 with the Open Primaries Initiative, wouldn't that just be going back to how Idaho used to be? Idaho hasn't always had a closed primary system, correct?
Correct. There are a lot of people who are in favor of the open primary part of it because the Republican Party chose to close their primary in 2012. And that meant you have to be a registered Republican in order to vote in that primary. And they closed that off. In this system, you can vote for any candidate in one race and then any candidate in another race. Everybody gets the same ballot. So that's a key difference. And I think, that's a benefit.
I was going to say, I think part of the issue, something nobody likes, but that we hear every election cycle is we have to vote for the lesser of two evils. I'm voting for the lesser of two evils in this race. And when you have a ballot where, you can just vote, you can vote for your favorite person in every primary, regardless of party. I think that is a really, unique, interesting thing. I think a lot of voters would resonate with that. I think a lot of people, like the Republican in this race, like the Democrat in this race, like, the constitutionalist candidate in this race. I think that gives you the ability to really broaden your who you want to vote for politically, what you want to say politically.
Yeah, and there's a lot of talk about how this will lessen extremism in Idaho. And the way that will happen, if this passes, is that a candidate, currently right now, particularly Republican candidates, they have to vote a certain way out of fear that they're going to get primaried by a more extreme candidate. And so, look at our abortion law. You may have a Republican candidate who's like, geez, we really need exceptions that are clear to protect the health of the mother. And so I'm going to vote for a bill that includes those exceptions and maybe, tempers down the rape and incest and makes that more clear. So that's easier to use as an exception. Well, the pro-life folks, the Idaho Chooses Life folks, they'll get triggered and they'll spend, however many thousands of dollars on mailers saying that, such and such candidate wants to kill babies, and send those mailers out. And then the primary, the Republican primary, closed, lower voter turnout. You have extremists tend to show up for that, and they have a better chance of, the extremist candidate has a better chance of winning in that closed primary with low voter turnout. And so now in an open primary with multi-party and top four, that candidate can now vote their conscience. Say, yeah, I'm going to vote for this abortion bill that provides more exceptions and more clarity when the health of the mother is at risk, without fear of being voted out in the primary. They still may lose the primary, but at least if they're in second place, they'll make it onto the general. And in the primary, they actually might draw a wider appeal to independent voters, unaffiliated voters, maybe libertarian candidates, voters. So that's how that argument works, is that the extremism would get weeded out through that open primary portion of it.
And what states have ranked choice voting, and is it popular in those states?
So Maine and Alaska are the only two states that have ranked choice voting right now, statewide. And I'm not sure about Maine. I know that Alaska, there is a ballot measure on the ballot this election to repeal ranked choice voting. Alaska voted for ranked choice voting in 2022, and it's relatively new. And the results were that a Democrat won a House seat in 2022 and is back on the ballot, facing one of her previous opponents in the upcoming election. Now, a lot of people point to that as like, well, Alaskans hate it, that's why it's on the ballot. Well, no, there's just a few people that don't like it. I mean, we'll find out on November 5th whether a majority of Alaskans are opposed to it. But there are definitely some drawbacks and some legitimate concerns about ranked choice voting.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get into those, break those down for listeners to, make sure everybody's just informed about what they're voting about. But first, why do you think this ballot initiative has stirred up so much opposition?
I think two things. One is it absolutely diminishes the power of the parties. And so I think the people who benefit from that, the political parties, and you see this in California where the Democrats oppose ranked choice voting because it diminishes their power and their ability to get the candidates in that they want in. And then coupled with that is that extremists tend to benefit from the current system that we have based on that primary scenario that I just shared. And right now, the Idaho Republican Party is dominated by the extremist Dorothy Moon is the chairwoman of the Idaho Republican Party. And definitely this would threaten that power and that ability to get in candidates that they favor. And you see what's going on with the central committees censuring candidates and using that as a black mark on their record so that they can, get a primary candidate that's more extreme and to the right of them into office.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. Cybersecurity Awareness Month is still going strong, and LifeLock is here with a message about phishing, the scam cybercriminals use to trick victims into allowing access to their devices so they can steal their personal info. Being aware of phishing scams is one way to help protect yourself. For comprehensive identity theft protection, there's LifeLock. Start protecting your identity today with a 30-day free trial at lifelock.com/podcast.
This episode is brought to you by Financial Times. When it comes to voicing or acting on our opinions, why are some people more confident than others? With the Financial Times, you form your own opinions with conviction based on unbiased and trusted reporting. FT journalists tackle global issues with an impartial and rigorous mindset, providing the facts and analysis that you need to make up your own mind. Make up your own mind with Financial Times. Visit ft.com/thejournal to read free articles and subscribe.
Scott, I want to know, what are the main arguments against Prop 1? We've all seen the signs. Is Prop 1 going to, quote, Californicate Idaho?
Boy, oh boy, I just don't know where that comes from. And I don't know. The idea that somehow this system would turn Idaho blue or turn us into California is really a head scratcher. You know, almost 2/3 of registered voters in Idaho are registered Republicans. And I think Donald Trump won with 70% of the vote or 75% of the vote in the last election. The idea that somehow folks would, that this system would somehow benefit Democrats and get Democratic candidates elected and turn Idaho blue is just really strange. And California does have a form of open primaries, but they don't have ranked choice. They have a top 2 general election for their state offices. And we have heard that if this initiative does pass in Idaho, that there's going to be a movement in the legislature to either repeal it or modify it. And one of the modifications would be to change it from a top 4 to a top 2. And so this initiative, as it's proposed, is not like California's system, and the suggestion that it would turn us into California just seems preposterous.
Yeah, I think that idea that the legislature would want to get rid of the 4 into the 2, I don't know. I've listened, I guess, to enough legislative debate that they always talk about how much they love competition, how competition is good for the market. It's good for the people. It seems like maybe they don't feel that way when it comes to voting in actuality. It's also so funny because, yeah, this idea that it would Californicate Idaho. Payson, Utah has ranked choice voting. Cities in New Mexico. I mean, is it going to Utah us? Is it going to New Mexico-ize us? It's just such an interesting buzzword, fear-mongering. Another thing that people say about ranked choice voting, though, is that it's too complicated for the average citizen to understand. It's just too complicated for people. Do you think that's an accurate statement?
I think it's a little bit of a tell. I think that they think voters are stupid. And there's an assumption that voters aren't going to be able to get this. That said, I know that there are folks they're just tuned out to politics. And when it comes election time, they're legitimate questions like, oh, wait a minute, who am I voting on? What am I voting in this race? What's on my ballot this year? And so there is a concern, I think, that if you've got a ballot with, 8, 9, 10 races on it, and you've got 4 choices for each one, I think there's a legitimate concern that voters are not going to be able to spend the time and research, 20, 25, 30, 35 candidates and make an informed decision. So I think there is some truth and legitimacy to that concern.
Well, and it is going to take some education. It is different than how we've been voting previously. So there is going to be some voter education that needs to happen. I don't think that means people are stupid, though. And that's quite a thing to say about your constituents.
I think the voters are smart enough to figure this out and smart enough to make informed decisions. Maybe it's a little more difficult, but voters can do it.
Another big point that I hear all the time, Scott, is that it's going to change the tradition of one person, one vote. Is that true? Is there any truth to that?
No. Every person has an opportunity to vote. And, there are I don't know, thousands, tens of thousands of people who don't vote in the election right now. Does that mean that they've been disenfranchised? It's the same thing. The other thing that I hear in conjunction with this is that ballots are thrown out. And that's just a dishonest argument.
Yeah.
So again, the argument is that you've got a ballot with 4 choices on it, and you choose your first place person, and maybe you don't vote for any of the other ones. That doesn't mean that your vote has been thrown out. You still got your first choice vote.
So what are the proponents of Proposition 1 saying that the ballot initiative could do for Idaho?
Well, I think the big thing is reduce that extremism. And again, getting rid of that component of fear among sitting legislators who might be afraid of being primaried. And then also, I think a big argument is that this would eliminate a lot of extremist candidates because they would not appeal to a broader array of voters. The other thing is, and I don't think this is talked about enough, is this taxation without representation. So the 270,000 voters who are unaffiliated in Idaho, they pay for these primaries. They pay taxpayer dollars to host these primaries, and they cannot vote. If they want to vote in the Republican primary, they cannot. They would be turned away. You're not a registered Republican, and so you can't vote. And so that disenfranchises those voters. Now, the counter argument, of course, is that, well, all they have to do is register to be a Republican, and then they can vote in the Republican primary. But I don't think that's a very American way to look at it. I don't think you shouldn't have to register with any political party to vote in this country. So I think, that's the other big thing that would do is enfranchise more voters.
Well, and I think that's so interesting when people say that, because I personally have registered Republican so I can vote in the primaries. And I have gotten so much hate, so much flack about that. And so, yeah, you have on the one hand, people like, if you want to vote, then register Republican. I'm like, okay, I did. And they're like, how dare you infiltrator, you're destroying our state. Like you cannot win with this closed primary system unless you're like in ideological lockstep with the loudest voices.
Yeah. And as a journalist, I have never affiliated with any party in my adult working life because I don't want to be seen as biased or affiliated with a party. Mm-hmm. That's the other thing too, is that even this open primary system, you don't have to choose a ballot. So no one will know, oh, I chose the Republican ballot or I chose the Democratic ballot. This is just all comers on all the ballots.
So, Scott, I think the question on everybody's mind, I know this is the question I get a lot. What do you think is the likelihood of Prop 1 passing?
If I had to guess today, I would say that it fails 55-45.
Interesting. Can I ask you to explain a little bit more why you think that is?
Yeah, I think, obviously the state is dominated by Republicans and the Republican Party and conservatives, and it's being, painted as this anti-conservative, anti-Republican measure, and that holds a lot of sway. And I think a lot of people, I just see a lot of misinformation and disinformation about it, and just a lot of vitriol about it. And so I think a lot of folks are going to go, the majority, 55% of the folks are going to go with that view.
Okay, before we go, you're moderating a Proposition 1 debate soon. Who's going to be debating? How can people check it out? We just got to get all of the information for our listeners about that, because I think that's very important.
Yeah, thank you. The Idaho Statesman is hosting this debate at 7:00 on Thursday, October 17th, in the Simplot Ballroom at Boise State University in the Student Union Building. Debating the measure is Luke Mayville, spokesperson for Idahoans for Open Primaries, and Trent England with Save Our States. Save Our States is an organization that opposes ranked choice voting across the country and is in support of the Electoral College, that kind of a thing. This is going to be in the Lincoln Douglas style of debate. So it's going to have arguments in favor. It's going to have cross-examination. It's going to have rebuttals and a couple of closing arguments. folks can register. We still have some seats left. I think we had to open it up. We got so many people signed up that we had to move to a bigger ballroom with more seating. And I think folks can still, depending on when you listen to this, we'll still be able to reserve a seat, but you do have to RSVP. It's free, but you have to RSVP at idahostatesman.com. There's a link on our website to the RSVP. We are planning on live streaming it. So if you don't get a seat, just go to idahostatesman.com and you'll be able to watch a live stream of it. And we are planning on recording it. So there will be a recording that you can watch afterwards.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm so glad that you are hosting that. I still know there are so many people who have questions, concerns, really want more information. So I think that is the perfect venue to get your questions answered or get more information before you vote.
Yeah, promises to be a really good, informative debate.
That's all for today here on CityCast Boise. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend about us? We'll be back tomorrow morning with your guide to the best local fall activities and festivals. See you then.